Do you think that Scotland should be able to hold a second referendum without the permission of Westminster?
No, I don't think so, because that is fundamentally changing the rules by which we are abiding. But I think there's a really important factor here. The reason the SNP can keep calling for independence referendums and really pushing something that they probably know they'll lose, and that also on this occasion they don't even believe is going to happen because they know the timetable doesn't work. There is no space between now and October for the process to actually allow them to hold a referendum in October. But the point is, they can do it because there's no detriment to losing. I mean, we won the last one. As unionists, we won the last referendum to keep the UK together. And you'd have thought that would be it. We'd won it for a generation. But actually, no. It's now coming back again constantly as a conversation. If we have another one and the SNP lose again, they immediately start on the third referendum. There needs to be a consequence to the SNP losing these independence referendums. That, you know, as unionists, do we just keep going until they win and we lose, and then that's it, done? Because that's how it feels. And actually, we need something akin to a Clarity Act that says, if you lose, there has to be a period of however long until you can have another one, or that's it. You get one more go at it. And if you lose again, we enshrine the UK forever. And until we have something like that, as unionists, we are in a constant state of battling in Scotland, and it's doing Scotland no good, and it's doing the people of Scotland no good. We need to have some clarification around this.
Well, that's a good point, but then they might try and do what the Conservatives tried to do with the 1922 committee and change that rule as well. What do you make of that, James? Do you think that's a good idea? Perhaps there should be a limit on, or some time span between each referendum, and there should be some penalty if you don't win, that you can't just keep going on and on and on.
No, I don't actually, because basically I'm a great believer in the will of the people and democracy. Now, I'm a supporter of independence. I'm not particularly a supporter of the Scottish Government. I think they're handling a lot of issues in Scotland is particularly misplaced, but also particularly the response to COVID, I think, was draconian at times. But we need to separate out the issue, I think, between the SNP and actually independence. I'm a great believer that independence, first of all, is for the people rather than politics. And for me, Scottish independence is more about independence politically combined with independence for the people. Now, I think there should be a properly ratified independence referendum. We've almost had 10 years here. A lot of circumstances have changed in Scotland since then. And also it's about the aspect of democracy. So the Tories, for instance, Tory government, have not won a national election in Scotland for over 65 years. And that's not really the best aspects of democracy. So I think one thing I do agree with Neil is I think we do need to bring it on and actually have a referendum whereby if the British government are confident that the Unionists will win, then they should have that referendum. Now, based on the last referendum in 2014, the polls were miles apart at the start of the campaign. It looked like it was going to be a clear win for the Unionists, but the polls did narrow, albeit the no campaign won in the end. But I'm a great believer.
But Neil also mentioned that perhaps the people in England should be able to vote as well.
No, it's up to the individuals in a particular country, because in Scotland there's a different set of circumstances in terms of tax, in terms of measures under devolution, in terms of health and education, and they actually live there. It's up to the will of the people in that country to decide. If, for instance, people in England wanted to decide that England should be independent, then the same rules would apply to them. So I think it's in the basis of where you actually live that decides the referendum. But I think we're at a point now whereby if the unionists are confident that they'll win again, they'll win again. That's the will of the people. That's democracy. That's a healthy thing.
Well, I hear that, but if you'd accepted the democracy, then literally from the time that the Scottish Independence Party lost the referendum, you said we've had 10 years. We've had 10 years of them campaigning for another referendum. Yeah, that's all absolutely. We've had, isn't it? There's not been anything, Michelle.
Yeah, that is exactly the problem. The independence campaign, if you want me to talk about that rather than the SNP, the independence campaign's version of democracy is that they launch the next campaign the day after they lose. So, this isn't democracy at all. This is an absolute onslaught. And part of the way they're dealing with that is by changing the rules across the board. So they introduce younger voters in the hope that they will then support their idea. They change the way in which they educate people in school about politics and democracy in the hope that they'll influence the vote next time round. We are literally under siege day after day after day, and we're not allowed to focus on the things that really matter to people. We're not allowed to focus on building Scotland up and enhancing the relationship we have with the UK. It is very interesting that in this white paper that they've just produced today, they talk about the relationship across the UK deteriorating, having worked really well for the first 17 years. And I would point out to them, it is really since Nicola Sturgeon took control that things have deteriorated. Now, maybe it's because of the way she behaves. Maybe it's her sort of anti-English rhetoric that the party constantly put out now. It's the divisiveness with which they talk about it. It's the way in which they twist facts to try and make out that Scotland is hard done by. You know, this is not the state of affairs that the majority of the country in Scotland want to live in. And yet it's forced upon us because they don't really believe in democracy. If they believed in democracy, they would listen to the majority. The majority voted against an independent state. They want to stay part of the UK. In the same way that the majority of the UK voted to leave the EU. And it's time that they did what they talk about and respect democracy.
James, final word to you.
Yeah, but part of the remit was that there would only be another referendum if circumstances changed. One of those circumstances being obviously the vote on Brexit, which roughly two out of three people in Scotland voted for Remain. The circumstances have also changed in terms of some of the appalling measures that have happened with the Conservative government at Westminster. We touch on a point that Neil said about in terms of would independence work financially. We've currently got a national debt of north of 2 trillion in the UK. So it's a bit rich of the UK government saying that Scotland couldn't actually afford being independent, when actually the UK government and the UK as a whole in terms of balance payments and national debt is off the scale in terms of debt. I think what we've got to do is look at the circumstances which have changed.
Scotland has a 22% deficit right now.
Well, apparently Scotland does have a 22% deficit. And just to bring you back with it, last year's autumn budget pledged a record 41 billion per year to Scotland. So Scotland is actually receiving a lot of money from England.
Absolutely.
Listen, this conversation could go on forever.